Beneath the serene beauty of the United Kingdom's parks, something dark stirs. Ghostly whispers, lost souls, and eerie shadows. Are these legends just stories, or do the spirits of the past still walk among us? 1. Stewart Park. It was a cold October night when Emma, a local history teacher, decided to take a walk through Stewart Park after dark. The air was thick with fog, and the full moon barely peeked through the clouds, casting an eerie glow across the landscape. As she walked along the path near the lake, she heard what sounded like soft footsteps behind her. At first, she dismissed it as the wind, but the steps grew louder, closer, as though someone were following her. Turning around, she saw nothing but an empty path. But the sound persisted. It wasn't until she reached the old oak tree near the park's edge that she felt a sudden chill run down her spine. She froze. There, standing in front of her, was a woman in a tattered white dress, her long hair flowing in the wind. Her pale, lifeless eyes locked onto Emma's, sending an ice-cold shiver through her body. Emma tried to speak, but no words came out. The woman's form seemed to flicker, like a fading shadow. Just before she vanished into the mist, Emma heard a soft whisper in her ear. "Help me." The next morning, Emma's students spoke of similar experiences they'd had near that same tree, a woman in white calling for help from the depths of the fog. 2. Panet Park. In the sleepy coastal town of Whitby, Panet Park was a place of refuge for those seeking quiet moments among the trees. Yet those who ventured here after dark often told a different story. On a particularly moonless night, Darren, a skeptic who worked as a local bartender, decided to take a walk to clear his mind after a long shift. As he wandered through the winding paths, Darren felt the temperature drop suddenly, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. He scoffed at the idea of ghosts, yet a nagging sense of unease crept over him. He had heard the stories, whispers of a widow who had once waited for her husband to return from sea. Her longing was so great that it tethered her soul to the park. As Darren neared the old stone bench by the fountain, he saw her, a woman in a long, flowing gown, her face obscured by a veil of dark hair. She didn't move as he approached. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Without a word, she lifted her hand slowly, pointing toward the distant horizon. The bench beside her creaked under an invisible weight, as if someone had just stood up. Darren turned to look at the direction she pointed, only to find that no boat had ever returned to shore. 3. Albert Park. Tom, a seasoned park ranger at Albert Park, had worked night shifts for years, but on this particular night, something was different. As he patrolled near the northern edge of the park, he was suddenly struck by an unsettling silence. The usual rustling of trees and chirping of late-night birds had faded, replaced by something else, an odd, echoing laughter, high-pitched and faint. Tom assumed it was just kids playing, maybe a group of late-night troublemakers. But as he rounded the bend near the old pavilion, the laughter grew louder and more frantic. It didn't sound like the playful laughter of children. It sounded wrong, almost desperate. Curious and unnerved, Tom moved toward the sound. He stopped at the pavilion's entrance, heart pounding. In the dim light of his flashlight, he saw nothing. But the laughter continued, circling around him as though the voices were coming from all directions. It wasn't until he turned to leave that he noticed something chilling. Small handprints, damp and smeared, leading toward the dark corners of the pavilion. Tom quickly retreated, his mind racing, but the laughter didn't stop until the first light of dawn. 4. Ampthill Park. Benjamin, an amateur historian, had always been fascinated by Ampthill Park's history. Known for its ancient oak trees and sprawling lawns, the park was once the site of a battleground. Late one evening, Benjamin decided to explore the old woods near the northern edge of the park, where soldiers were rumored to have marched during the English Civil War. As he walked deeper into the forest, he felt an oppressive heaviness in the air, the quiet punctuated only by the distant sound of the wind rustling the leaves. Then it came, a faint sound of boots marching. At first, Benjamin thought it was his imagination, but the sound grew louder, more distinct and rhythmic. He turned around, expecting to see other park-goers, but there was no one. The footsteps were now right behind him, too close for comfort. Suddenly, Benjamin saw them, figures dressed in old military garb, their faces gaunt and hollow. They walked past him, their eyes blank and unblinking, marching toward a phantom battle that could never be won. The march continued, growing fainter as they disappeared into the mist, but the eerie sound of boots on the path lingered in his mind long after he left the park. 5 Selly Oak Park Sarah, a university student, was drawn to Selly Oak Park for late-night runs to clear her head. However, something about the park had always unsettled her, especially when she ran near the thick grove of trees. It was as if the shadows themselves whispered. One evening, Sarah, wearing her headphones, was lost in the rhythm of her run when she felt a sudden tug on her arm. Startled, she whipped around, expecting to find a prankster or someone messing with her, but there was no one. She continued running, but now the whispers were clearer, almost like soft voices calling her name from the darkness. She stopped and turned off her music, listening intently. The voices were faint, but unmistakable. They called her name again, this time from deep within the trees. "Sarah," they whispered. Her heart raced as she sprinted towards the park entrance, but as she passed the old wooden bench near the gate, she froze. There, sitting motionless, was a shadowy figure. It turned its head slowly to face her, its hollow eyes reflecting the streetlight. It opened its mouth, but instead of words, a low, rasping breath escaped. Sarah didn't stop running until she reached the safety of her apartment. But even then, she couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers followed her. They were waiting, patient, for her to return. 6. Grosvenor Park. Lily had always admired the beauty of Grosvenor Park, with its perfectly manicured lawns, tranquil lakes, and towering trees. But she had never ventured into the park after dusk. Tonight, she was drawn to it by the sound of soft music playing. Something faint, like a violin's lament, carried by the breeze. Curious, Lily followed the sound towards the old gazebo at the far end of the park. The night was quiet, and the city's hum seemed distant. As she walked closer, she noticed a faint light flickering from the upper windows of the nearby mansion, an abandoned, centuries-old building known as the Grovena House. She approached the mansion, her footsteps muffled by the thick grass. The light in the window grew brighter. Through the panes, she saw her, a woman, dressed in a flowing gown, sitting by the window with a violin resting against her chin. The woman's face was obscured by a curtain of dark hair, but Lily felt the weight of her gaze, piercing, cold. Lily was about to move closer when the violinist's head jerked upwards, her eyes wide with terror. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the woman vanished, the light extinguishing in an instant. Lily froze, her heart racing, as the violin's haunting melody echoed across the park, despite the empty windows. The next morning, she learned that the mansion had once belonged to a prominent family, and the violinist was rumored to be the last lady of the house, whose tragic death in a fire was never fully explained. It was said her spirit, forever trapped in the mansion, played her violin in an eternal mourning of the fire that consumed both her and her home. 7. Lime Park. Tom, a photographer, was in Lime Park to capture the fading autumn light. He loved this park, its ancient woods, the sprawling fields, and the towering trees that had witnessed centuries of history. Yet something about the place always felt off. It was quiet, too quiet, even for a park this size. As Tom ventured deeper into the woods, he came across an old, dilapidated stone wall, half covered in moss. He stopped to take a few photos, but as the lens focused on the worn edges of the stone, he saw something, or someone, moving between the trees. A man, pale and gaunt, staggered slowly toward him. He wore a soldier's uniform from a long-forgotten era, the fabric torn and stained with blood. His face was grim, his eyes vacant as he shuffled closer, dragging his left leg with every step. Tom instinctively stepped back, but before he could move, the soldier's eyes locked onto his. "Help me," the man whispered, his voice hoarse. "I never made it home." Tom's heart raced. The soldier seemed to flicker, his form wavering like a mirage. As Tom reached out to grab his camera, the man collapsed into the undergrowth, vanishing without a trace. The photo Tom took that day revealed nothing but the twisted trees and the overgrown stone wall. But when he returned home and developed the film, he found the faint image of a soldier's shadow behind him, in the frame, pale, bloodied, and forever wandering. 8. Green Park. Aidan had never been afraid of Green Park, even at night. As a local resident, he often walked through it after dark, cutting across the park on his way home. But one night, things felt different. It was around 11:30 p.m., and the park was almost completely deserted. The sky above was a mixture of purple and deep blue, and the park's trees seemed to stretch ominously toward the heavens. Aidan had his headphones on, lost in his music when he first heard it. At first, it was just a whisper, something barely audible, almost like the wind. But then came the scream, high-pitched, hollow, and filled with desperation. Aidan froze in place. The scream sounded as if it was coming from underground, a tortured cry that seemed to echo from the earth itself. He ripped off his headphones and looked around, but the park was silent again. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their leaves rustling peacefully. He took a step forward, but the scream came again, louder this time and filled with agony. It sounded like a woman, no, a girl, screaming for help, and it was coming from beneath the ground, from where the earth seemed to swallow everything in its path. Terrified, Aidan hurried out of the park, but the screams followed him, lingering in his mind as though the earth itself was crying for those lost within it. 9. Nonsuch Park. David, an avid runner, had heard the legends about Nonsuch Park. It was said to be the site of a forgotten hunt, an event that took place centuries ago, where the hunt ended in tragedy. Now locals spoke of ghostly riders and spectral hounds that roamed the park at night, searching for something lost to time. One evening, David set out to explore the park after dark. The air was thick with mist, the kind that swirled in the trees and gave the place an otherworldly feel. He ran through the woods, enjoying the solitude, when suddenly he heard it, the sound of hooves pounding the earth, distant but unmistakable. David stopped dead in his tracks. The sound grew closer, faster. A flash of movement appeared at the edge of his vision. Dark shapes, riding horses at full speed, accompanied by the growls of hounds. Panicked, David tried to outrun them, but the hooves grew louder, the hounds barking echoing in his ears. He stumbled into a clearing, where the riders stopped, their faces hidden by the shadow of their hoods. Their horses pawed the earth impatiently, and the dogs growled, but no one moved. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the riders vanished into the mist, leaving David trembling, his breath shallow and quick. The sound of hooves and barking was gone, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the hunt would never end, forever trapped in the woods of Nonsuch Park. 10. Veruium Park. Diana had always been fascinated by Veruium Park. Situated near the ruins of a Roman city, it was a place where history seemed to breathe. One autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Diana ventured deeper into the park, hoping to capture the beauty of the ruins in the fading light. As she stood at the edge of the ancient amphitheater, setting up her camera, she began to hear the faintest sound, a distant murmur. It was like voices, but not in any language she recognized. She turned, thinking someone else was near, but the park was empty. The voices grew louder, now accompanied by the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, as if a procession was approaching. Diana's pulse quickened. She looked toward the ruins, and in the dimming light, she saw them. A group of shadowy figures, their faces obscured by the shadows of the stones, walking slowly toward her. The figures, dressed in ancient Roman attire, were moving in perfect synchrony, their eyes vacant, their steps synchronized with the rhythm of the earth beneath them. They walked past her, as if they hadn't noticed her presence. Their murmurs grew louder, speaking of battles, of a lost empire, of forgotten gods. Diana felt an oppressive weight in the air, as if the very ground beneath her feet was alive with the echoes of the past. The figures passed without a sound, but their presence lingered long after they had disappeared into the night, leaving her to wonder, were they ghosts, or were they simply waiting for someone to remember them? 11. Victoria Park. Lena, a young artist, had recently moved to London, drawn by the city's history and the beauty of its parks. Victoria Park was her favorite, with its wide lawns, tranquil ponds, and paths lined with trees. But on a particularly cold winter's evening, she ventured into the park later than usual, desperate for inspiration. As she walked near the large, ornamental lake, she saw her, a girl standing motionless on the edge of the water, staring into the depths. The girl was dressed in an old-fashioned white dress, her hair cascading in waves, her face a pale mask. Lena hesitated for a moment, wondering if the girl needed help. She took a step toward her, but just as she did, the girl turned her head slowly and locked eyes with her. The gaze was unsettling, empty, as though the girl had no soul to speak of. But what struck Lena the most was the sense of foreboding that washed over her. She was frozen, rooted to the spot. Then, as quickly as Lena had noticed her, the girl began to vanish, her form dissipating like smoke in the fog. Terrified, Lena turned and ran back to her flat. But in the following days, she heard strange rumors. There were whispers of a young woman who had drowned in the lake many years ago, her body never found, her spirit bound to the waters. The tale was always the same. The girl in white, waiting for someone to join her in the depths of the lake. 12. Heavitree Park. Gavin had always been the practical type. A detective by profession, he wasn't one to indulge in tales of the supernatural. But after a particularly long day at the office, he decided to clear his mind with a stroll through Heavitree Park. It was close to dusk, the shadows stretching long across the grass, and the park was unusually quiet for a spring evening. As he walked along the main path, something caught his attention: movement. At first, it seemed like a person walking towards him, but as he drew closer, he realized the figure wasn't moving at all. A man standing perfectly still under the large oak tree near the park's entrance, his eyes fixed on Gavin with an intensity that felt unnatural. Gavin called out to him, thinking the man might need assistance, but there was no response. He quickened his pace, passing the man without a second glance, but something gnawed at him, an uneasy feeling that refused to fade. The next day, as Gavin was reviewing a case file, he noticed a strange detail in the police report, a murder from years ago, near Heavitree Park. The victim was found beneath the very same oak tree. The description matched the man Gavin had seen the night before. And what disturbed him most was the chilling note. Witnesses claimed the victim's ghost had been seen standing there ever since, watching those who passed by. 13. Meadow Park. It was a crisp, quiet evening when Emily, a newcomer to Exeter, decided to explore Meadow Park. Known for its open spaces and towering trees, the park had an old-world charm. But on this night, something felt off. As she wandered along the winding paths, she heard it, faint crying, distant at first, but growing louder. She followed the sound toward an old, neglected bench at the park's edge. As she got closer, the sobs became sharper, more desperate, like a lost child calling out for help. Emily looked around, but saw no one. The park seemed eerily empty. She crouched near the bench, looking underneath, but found only tangled roots and dirt. The crying stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed felt unnatural. Later, as she spoke to locals, she learned of a child who had vanished near that very bench many years ago. The child's body was never found, and it was said that, on quiet nights, his cries could still be heard, waiting for someone to listen. And just as mysteriously, every year, on the same date, new footsteps appear in the wet ground around the bench. 14. Clandon Park. Richard had fond memories of Clandon Park from his childhood, particularly the grand gardens surrounding the manor. Now, as an adult, he was curious to revisit the park. One afternoon, he wandered into the maze-like gardens, savoring the beauty of the blooming flowers and the peaceful atmosphere. But when he reached the old fountain, he saw her, a woman in an old-fashioned gown, standing motionless by the water. Her long hair was tangled with ivy, her hand outstretched, as if waiting for something, or someone. Richard, intrigued, called out to her, but she didn't respond. Suddenly, she turned to face him. Her eyes were hollow, her face pale and lifeless, like a forgotten ghost. Before Richard could react, the woman vanished, leaving only the scent of lavender in the air. Back at a local pub, he overheard a conversation about a noblewoman who had lost her husband to battle and waited by that very fountain for his return. Her spirit, it seemed, never left, still mourning her loss by the garden's waters. And some say that if you stand near the fountain at midnight, you can hear her whisper his name through the wind. 15. Raygate Priory Park. Freddie, a reporter with a healthy skepticism, had heard strange tales about Raygate Priory Park. The most unsettling story was about the ancient priory ruins at the center of the park, rumored to be haunted by the spirits of monks who had once lived there. One foggy evening, determined to uncover the truth, Freddie entered the park with his camera and flashlight. As he neared the ruins, the air felt heavier, and the place seemed unnaturally silent. He shone his flashlight on the ancient stone walls, only to feel a chill run down his spine. That's when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from behind him. He turned around, but saw nothing. The footsteps grew louder. Then, from the mist, shadowy figures appeared, hooded monks, walking in perfect formation toward him. Freddie snapped a photo, but when he looked at it, he saw no monks. Instead, there were only hundreds of glowing eyes, reflecting in the darkness. Terrified, he ran from the park, but the eyes stayed with him, haunting him in every reflection, watching from the shadows. Now, in the darkest corners of the park, those same eyes are said to follow anyone brave enough to enter after dusk. So, have you ever visited a park where something strange happened? Or do you have a ghostly tale of your own? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to join Creepy Experience for more spine-tingling stories. Let's spread these eerie encounters to all those who crave a good thrill. Who knows what you'll discover next time?